Hi everyone, my name is Matt. Welcome to my shop. Having sharp chisels and plane irons is an essential part of any woodworking shop, so being able to consistently put a nice sharp edge on those tools is paramount. Today I'm going to show you how easy that is with the Kell number 1 and number 2 honing guides. The number 1 and number 2 share very similar construction. The primary difference is the number 1 is smaller and is meant for smaller, narrower blades. At the core of the construction are these stainless steel rods. These rods are going to contact the iron or the chisel that you're trying to sharpen and help to hold it at the right angle in the right position. On the inside are two polycarbonate washers, and these are what's actually going to be holding the chisel or iron in place as the whole unit comes together and clamps down on whatever you're trying to sharpen. The wheels on the number 2 are made from ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, or UHMWPE for short, and the wheels on the number 1 are made from erdolite. The number 1 can clamp things from 0 to 1 inches wide, and since it has smaller rollers, it needs less protrusion to set the angle for the chisel or iron that you're trying to sharpen, so this is going to be really great for short chisels. The number 2 can clamp anything from 0 all the way up to 2 and 5/8 inches wide, which means it's going to be able to help you sharpen pretty much any blade in your hand tool cabinet. It can sharpen anything from a 1/16 inch wide chisel all the way up to the iron for a number 8. The guide can be quickly and easily adjusted by spinning this brass knob, and the low friction wheels make it almost effortless to actually sharpen. So let's grab some chisels and try this thing out. So for this demonstration, I'm going to be using this 1¼ inch chisel, and the edge has a little bit of fracturing on it, so it does need a decent amount of work. So the first thing you want to figure out is the angle that you want to sharpen your chisels at, or what they're ready sharpened at. The instructions that come with the guide come with a nice list of all the protrusions you're going to need to set whatever angle you possibly want. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using 1¼ inch, which should give me around a 30-degree bevel angle. So to use the guide is really simple. You're just going to spin the knob to open it up until it is wide enough for the chisel to rest down onto the stainless steel bars. And you just tighten down the knob enough until the washers contact the chisel on the sides, and you can still slide it back and forth very easily, but it's not going to fall off. There's not a lot of slop in there. Next, using a ruler, you're going to set the protrusion of the chisel past the rods. And again, I'm using 1¼ inch, so I'll just slide the guide forward until it hits 1¼ inch and then lock it down. One thing you can do to make this a little more repeatable is to create a setup block based off of this protrusion. That way you're not measuring every time. You just set this into the block and then lock it down, and it's at the same angle every single time. So since this chisel is going to need a little bit of work, I'm starting with an 800 grit water stone. And to use the guide is really simple. The wheels just rest right onto the stone. Just pivot the chisel down onto the stone and then work it back and forth. Now with these longer chisels, it's a little more awkward because there's so much weight hanging off the back. So I find it a lot easier to just do a pull stroke on these. On the smaller chisels where it's a little more stable, you can go back and forth without any issue. So let's stop and take a look at our progress. You can see there's still a little bit of those fractures there, so we'll keep going. So that looks good. The fractures are all gone, so I can move on to the next grit, which is going to be 4000. Once I've achieved a nice even polish across the entire bevel, I can move on to the next grit, which is going to be 8000. And again, here I'm just looking for an even polish, and it looks good, and this thing is done. Let's see how sharp this thing is. So let's take a look at the number 1 guide and see where this is going to be really useful. This is going to be really useful for short bladed chisels like this one. On this guide, the protrusion isn't nearly as much as the number 2 guide or a lot of the other guides on the market. So with this, you can clamp something as short as this little tiny chisel here and actually sharpen it. To sharpen this to an angle of 30 degrees, it only needs to protrude a 1/2 inch from the rods. So with this little chisel in the guide, we can start working through the grits to get a really nice edge on this thing. Now, I've never been able to get a good edge on this chisel because it's just too short for my guides and it was in too rough a shape for me to do it freehand. So it kind of just sat on my shelf for a while. So let's see if we can get a nice sharp edge on here with a little work on the stones. So the biggest advantage of this style of guide are the two wheels on the outside of whatever you're sharpening. This gives you a really stable sharpening experience as opposed to a standard side clamping guide with a single wheel underneath the blade. These ones can get really rocky, especially if you're trying to sharpen something really narrow. It's typically really difficult to get a nice square edge on a really narrow chisel like an 1/8 inch chisel with a traditional side clamping guide. But since the wheels on the Kell guide provide a really stable platform, there's no issue with rocking or anything like that. You don't have to worry about trying to keep that chisel down to the stone. All you have to worry about is moving the guide back and forth. So even though having the wheels on the outside makes this thing really stable, there's one drawback here, and that's the actual width. Most of the stones you're going to have, if you're trying to sharpen something really wide like this number 8 blade, with the blade inside the guide, it's just not going to fit on the stone. The wheels are going to be off on the outside of the stone and not touching it. So you have a couple of options here. First thing you can do is create a platform with a couple of scraps of wood or anything really, and make these things nice and flush along the top so that the stone is totally flush and level to the side pieces. So all you're doing here is really just extending the platform. And then you can actually ride the wheels on your extension pieces and sharpen like normal. Now, one thing that I noticed as I was playing with these is that if you're just trying to put a little bit of an edge on here, you're not doing a whole lot of sharpening, it's really easy to just run the blade this way on the stone and take some shorter passes, and it works just fine. Again, it's really just more for a final polishing. If you really have to remove a lot of material, that's not going to work so well, or it's going to take you a lot longer. So thanks for taking a look at these Kell Honing Guides with me today. I hope you can see how they can make your sharpening experience a little easier and maybe even fun. Fun enough to get all the tools in your cabinet razor sharp. So thanks as always for watching, and until next time, happy woodworking.